Wi-Fi off a minute.
And now, video. Hold on.
So you just, if you have any issues with the streaming, just let it run. We'll upload the recorded copy if we have problems. There's issues with apparently with the streaming. All the synagogues are streaming this morning. This morning, Sunday we couldn't get on, or we had a hard time on Sunday streaming the church services. It was just saturated.
Yeah, I didn't even thought about that.
Yeah, it's crazy. Last night we had a terrible time with the Medida. They kept kicking us off and giving us a content control notice that we had violated content. I know.
What were you talking about?
About the Budweiser viral.
Oh.
Apparently, you say those words on
Really?
YouTube, you can get. They'll just
You think
shut
it was
it up.
that?
Yeah, I looked it up.
Really?
Yeah. Because we couldn't figure it out because they're like, you have copyright protection. They can send you the little form email right away. Get it right away.
Huh.
And it says this content's been removed because it violated community guidelines or copyright thing. And we were thinking, well, maybe I had made this new little logo for the freeborn, a little circle with the little headphones on it. Real generic. I just pieced it together and I thought, well, maybe it looks like a copyrighted logo somebody has. I don't know. I couldn't imagine because it's tiny in the corner. I mean, crazy, right? And it says Coca-Cola. I don't understand that. No, it has this. So we thought, well, maybe it's that. But no, I looked it up and they told me, they wrote me from Mexico, Cuellar, and told me that he had heard pastors saying that they could not get videos on YouTube if they were talking about this.
So the words, using those words, bringing them up.
Yeah.
Is the Spanish word like in a Spanish language?
Well, he's from Mexico, so he's saying it from Spanish. Yeah.
And it sounds the same, right?
I guess. I mean, this is a huge company. They do all the translations, so I'm sure they're not just looking at English language.
Yes.
They got their same algorithms and AI for all these different languages, and as far as we know, they are implementing firewall and censoring and banning for countries like China that require it to even be in the country to operate there. So they're doing this in every language probably that is known practically. Anyways, yeah, so we have to, basically we can't talk about that if we want the video to go live. That crazy? That's just, and
that is.
It is. It's just, and we were, maybe
must be
2
banning
minutes
a lot
into
of
it,
people.
5 minutes into it.
How many people are they banning? There's so many people talking about that.
I know, and there are videos online. That's why Terry is like, no, it can't be that because I hear videos all day. I know, so do I. But I went on, and the thing is they have a provision in their community guidelines that says that anything that's like a recent or current event that's like painful, they don't want you talking about it.
Right.
So like a shooting or anything like that, they don't want people just like using that for sensationalistic fodder.
You get more viewers because you talking about something.
And you talk about it and they don't want to do that. And so it looks to me like they are applying. Now what I did get from YouTube and Google is they have on their page, on their site, they said that they right now have sent most people home. And so it used to be, apparently the way it worked is, if the AI flags something, it would kick it to a person. And then a person would log in, look at it,
right,
and see what's actually going on, and see if
and they can measure it and say,
they can look at it and go, oh, okay, there's no big deal. But now it's not. So now everything just gets kicked off.
Right.
So and I had heard the Dividing Line. I don't know if you've ever listened to Dividing Line with James White.
No.
Reformed Christian in Arizona. Does a lot of textual criticism stuff and things like that, and apologetics. He's big into apologetics. Anyways, I listen to him every now and then, and I heard him just the other day, like 3 days ago, and he was saying, like, telling his producer, they talk back and forth on their podcast, and he's like, he would like, hey, but he was serious. He wasn't joking around. He didn't
want it to be mentioned.
Yeah, you couldn't mention. If you want it, it's like you have to agree to the censorship, or you're not going to be able to talk. It's crazy. So anyway, so we basically have to. I was going to ask you what you thought about all that, but I think we'll just stay away from that topic.
Well, it's biowarfare.
I don't want to say I'm a conspiracy theorist, but yeah, no kidding. Anyway, so we're here at the Freeborn Podcast. Little segue there, I guess, get started. But welcome to the Freeborn Podcast, and I'm here with a special guest today, Stephen Kincaid from Oak Knoll, the Gatherings in Jesus' Name at Oak Knoll Church in San Antonio, Texas. I thank you for being here.
Thank you
I was
for
excited
having me.
all week about it. That's going to be fun. We're old friends, go back a long time. And Stephen emailed me last, I guess it was Tuesday or Wednesday maybe of last week, on some questions and objections about the conversation that we got into on the last podcast on marriage and the role of women in marriage. And so rather than trying to do it over email, which just goes on forever, I thought we'd just be a lot better for everyone, get together and have a conversation on this subject, because to me it's a very interesting subject. And I think you jump in and correct me if you don't agree with how I'm representing your position or our mutual position.
Before you get started,
Yeah.
actually, just so you're aware who's actually listening right now, you got Marco Chidas, Joseph Kennel, and Helika Jackson.
Oh, okay. Well, cool. Well,
Ah.
welcome to everyone that's listening. And, I'm glad you're here. Hope it keeps up. If you lose the stream, we're just going to keep going. We're recording it as well, and we're going to just upload it later. So hopefully you won't lose the stream, but that's the idea there. Anyway, so this is what I think. I think that you and I are a lot closer than we're apart on this.
I would agree.
I would think that's the case. And so, but I do think it's an interesting thing because to talk about this, because I think that where we might have some differences are not actually on the doctrine itself. And I could be wrong. We may find out that you're a heretic, and we've got we have the firewood piled outside to for that contingency. We're ready.
I've always wanted to be a martyr.
Yeah. Well, now's your lucky day, punk. No. But I think that there's actually the difference that we'll find is going to be on a separate issue that is blended, I think.
Right.
But we'll see. We'll see how it works out. So before I get started, I want to try to explain what I think might be your position. Let me rephrase that. I want to explain what I think is the generic position that you're arguing for. Now, it may not be your specific position. You may have some nuances
Right.
or distinctions in there that and say, no, I don't see that. But I would like for you to listen to it and you tell me if you think I'm representing fairly that side of this issue. All right. It may not be your specific side, but it'd be, that's a good, because in my opinion, I thought about this and wrote tons of copy on this all week, and I couldn't nail down a specific point of view because I don't think it's that. I don't think the people on this side have nailed down a very specific position. I think they're all over the board on that side. So if you draw a line and say that side and this side, whatever they may be, I think they're all over the board on that side. And so I had a hard time nailing it down.
Yeah, I really don't know what side. I mean, I really don't. I don't think I've gotten into it where I know this side and I know that side. I really just listen to people and I see arguments and ask questions about
the
it.
idea
Go
then
ahead.
would be, what you've heard. This isn't to say, oh yeah, so and so thinks that. This is to say, that's a fair representation of those that would disagree with you, if you took them on an average. So it's kind of a weighted average is how I try to do this because I had a hard time. And so it would go something like this. I'm going to basically read it so that I can get it right. The scriptures contain 3 important teachings regarding the marriage relationship and its social structure and hierarchy. The first is the creation account, where we are told by Moses, Jesus, Paul, that God made the man first and the woman second, which according to these writers establishes a default protocol of submission of the woman under the authority of the man. That would be the first evidence that would be given. The second one is the consequence of Eve's sin and the curse, which disqualify her in this life from the position of authority in the church and in the marriage. So the first one is that God made man first, woman second. So just the order of creation is evidence and reason for cause of submission and obedience. And then the second one would be that Eve, because she was beguiled, like Paul says, then that's a second reason for this. And then the third reason would be is the archetypical relationship between Jesus and the church that marriage is designed to illustrate, in which Jesus sacrifices himself for the good and well-being of the church, and the church submits and obeys Christ. So if you take these three together, I'm still arguing there. I'm
Right.
devil's advocate. So if you take these three teachings together, we, men and women, should submit to God's revealed order that the husband is the head of the home and the wife should voluntarily submit to his leadership and obey. A key component of that submission is obedience. Even though the word might stick in our throats and the concept of a woman being taught to obey her husband is alien to our culture and most certainly politically incorrect, it is not alien to reality. Women obey their bosses, many of them are male. Women obey police officers, many of them are male. Women obey their Pilates and spinning instructors, and many of them are male. Obedience is not a diminishing or demeaning relationship either. First, it is absolutely essential to any successful social structure. But more importantly, it is a noble and exalting virtue that honors God's design in creation. It illustrates his son's relationship with the church and, according to Paul, redeems womankind of their transgression in the garden. So that's how I would summarize a weighted average on that side. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that sounds.
Is there anything you
Good.
take issue with on that you think I didn't represent fairly or I missed something there?
Maybe adding to the, I guess you gave 3 at the beginning. One, I don't know if you would consider this part of that. That is, I think there's a design by God just to have order.
Right, that would be the first one that God made, and that's based
First,
on,
okay.
right. So the idea is God made man first and Eve, and that's saying that is purposeful and has implications. So you can't just say
Okay.
that it's just like, well, something had to be first. So it's that everything God did, it was done with purpose and results in implications is how I would explain. If I was arguing from that side, that would be
Yes.
my point. That would be my thing. It's like, and because it's made the point, Paul makes the point. He says, the woman was not first. She was not, the man wasn't made for the woman was made for the man. How do we know that? Because she was made second, and then you have
Yes.
the whole way in which it was done, the way Genesis represents the reason for her creation. So yes, that would all
Yeah, I think
be.
that would be a
So yeah, I mean, this
fair
was a very
argument. Yes. a
compressed version,
yes.
where the idea is I got all the main points in that you could then unpack to what would be, I think, a fair.
I think it would be a fair
Okay,
argument.
do you want to do one on mine?
No, I really don't. See, as far as the email I was sent, all I'm saying is whenever you gave some arguments, I wasn't sure I agreed with the arguments you gave.
right.
But I really don't even remember exactly you having an argument.
Yeah,
I don't
it kind
remember-
of. Well, part of it is because it develops in a conversation. So there's a difference in how, like, if we're sitting around talking about cameras, and all of a sudden we get into light, and then that leads us to how light might represent a doctrine. Like a lot of times, I look at light as being a good illustration for grace, and so we might end up talking about grace. And in that context, I'm not probably going to like it's called steel man the opposite side, because I'm not really debating it, and I'm not trying to represent the side.
Right.
I'm explaining. And another issue, and you brought this up in your email. Another issue is I generally don't steel man arguments for positions that are well established and everyone has had their plenty of time and opportunity to make the very best argument they can make, unless I'm formally teaching it. So if I were to get up in church and formally teach this, then I would probably take the whole first, at least one sermon or lecture, and present the side that I'm talking. That would be I don't like to talk against sides, so it wouldn't be that, but that would take issue with what I'm saying. That I know there's going to be issue. I know there's going to be people who have been taught that way or are influenced by that way, and so I want them to say, no, okay, I understand where you're coming from. This is where I think you're coming from. And so when I'm speaking, I understand that we're not maybe in agreement, and I understand your point of view. But when I'm doing it in conversation, I generally do not do that. Unless it's something I think is esoteric and hasn't had opportunity to be presented and people haven't heard it. But as far as I can tell, I think there's been like 200 years of teaching on this at least in America. So it's like, if they need me to make it clear for them, well, then that is like, well, then, basically that shows the problem in the problem. And I don't think they do. I'm being facetious.
Right.
I think that they have, I think there's like what I just read here, and I can email you that later if you want to look over it carefully. But I think that is a very fair view of it, and I think it's a very strong argument. Now, I wouldn't call that a steelman argument. I called it a tin man argument because it has a lot of problems in it, and I could not find a way around them. I tried really, really hard. So the point of contention, as I understand it, in your email and what brought this up, is not submission. I don't think there's any Christians who have any regard whatsoever for orthodoxy who have a problem with the idea of submission. I don't think there are.
With the
that
idea
women
or the
should
word?
submit. The idea
Okay.
that women should submit to their husbands. I'm not saying there aren't Christians. I'm saying that I'm not counting
Yes.
the liberal, higher criticism style. I mean Christians that say, we believe the Bible. I just don't think you're going to find them. The issue is the issue of obedience. The word
Right.
and the idea, that issue, whatever, and we'll get into that in a second. I think that's the actual, and I think that's the issue between us, is that one. Because I have, again, and so the reason I say this was a 10-man argument, I called it that, is because it does not resolve that. I could not find a way, and I worked it in. I worked obedience in everywhere I could, and it seemed reasonable, and it didn't seem like I was poisoning the argument to do so. But it does poison the argument, as far as I can tell. If I wanted to argue that, and I was arguing against me, it'd be very hard. And so I tried another one. This is real short. But I tried another one, trying to make it more to the point of obedience, not to the point of submission, because I find those to be different. Even I find them to be different. I think that's the distinction between us, or the chasm between us, is the issue of obedience. And so I'm trying to find a argument for what I would consider your side that actually makes an argument for obedience, because this one makes an argument for submission.
Yes.
Okay, that the woman's created first. The woman was beguiled. Christ and the church, the archetypal illustration of Christ, them being an archetypal illustration of Christ in the church, that's all for submission. So I tried to come up with something for obedience. And this is kind of the best I got, and it's not good. It just, I couldn't figure it out. Anyways, I would say marriage is a hierarchical relationship with the husband in obedience to God and the wife to the husband. Without obedience, there cannot be order. Each would pull their own way, vying for preeminence. The responsibility of the man is to lead. The responsibility of the woman is to follow. This is the beauty of God designing each thing with sacred purpose. Because of humanity's rebelliousness, they see this design as limiting and demeaning, preferring anarchy, a design of no design, an order of no order. They want the chaos of self-will, even if it means mutually assured destruction. That's how best I could come up with.
Okay.
So how would you argue for the point? So women should obey their husbands. Let's just make that the proposition. You okay with that?
Women should obey their husbands. Okay.
As a proposition.
Yes.
And okay. So how would you argue for that? I've given you how I would argue if I was sitting on the other side of the table, but how would you argue that to me?
So, obviously, I'm taking this from Scripture. I mean, I if I'm not thinking about this as a socially looking right, in America
Right,
today,
political correctness.
simply just could I say the Bible is teaching women to obey or wives to obey their husbands?
Okay.
And so if that's the proposition, I would want to understand what I mean by obey, or what does obedience mean. For example, one thing I didn't really understand or consider when I heard you speaking about it was well, we just do everything they tell us, and we don't think about it. We don't, everything they say we do, as if that is what obedience would be. And I'm not sure that is. I don't
Okay.
think obedience would be you do it without even thinking. There's no thought. It's been said, and you do it. No thinking. No. I wouldn't say that is what obedience is.
Okay.
I
What
wouldn't
is
say-
obedience?
I
then?
wouldn't say that's for the children or for servants to masters, like it says.
Then what is obedience precisely?
So I do believe obedience is doing what somebody else has told you to do, or somebody else's will. It's you putting your will aside and doing what the other person desires, wills, or commands, or says, tells you to do. But I think it's with thought. It's with reason, with your own, you do think about it. It's not just you do it because you do it.
Okay.
And in that sense, I would say yes.
So,
wives would.
So then when you say you think about it, what does that mean? See, here's the problem I have with this topic, and that I could actually give you a list of topics where I have the same issue with fundamentalists, and that is that I think that they are more after semantical orthodoxy than they are actual biblical doctrine. That's my issue with them. I've had this issue a very, very long time, where it's like if you say the right words, they can mean anything you want them to mean as long as you say the right words. And so it's like this. It's like obedience. Yes, they need to obey. I think this is completely brought on because you have one place in the King James Bible that translates submit, the Greek word for submit, to obey, as it relates to women or relates to marriage. And because that word is there, that matters more than anything else. That's the issue.
So again, I wouldn't agree with that. See,
With what?
one is that's the only reason why we would say
Okay.
a wife needs to submit to.
You mean obey?
Obey.
Okay.
Just because of that one, I'm guessing.
Okay,
you're
if
talking
it
about
wasn't
Titus.
there, yeah, right. Right. If let's say that Titus was translated submit,
Okay.
then what argument would you have biblically
Well,
for obedience?
Titus. Okay, so Titus because Titus says the same word, obedient to obey.
Hupotasso.
Hupotasso, exactly. That word comes up when it's talking about wives to their husbands, and when it's talking about servants to their masters.
Right, and let's say
in
that they
Titus.
would have translated that as submit,
As submit.
where they do
Servants
yes.
submit.
Okay, so then you don't have any verse that says obedience.
Well, you have 1 Peter, where it says Sarah obeyed Abraham, and that is not hupotasso. It is the same
Right,
word.
it is obedience.
Obedience. Yes.
Right, but that's not saying all women have to obey. That's a difference. So you
it says,
think,
"Wives, be subject to your own husbands, as Sarah obeyed."
and so you would think that with that verse alone, that
I would say
connection would
it's
be made.
teaching. I would say it's teaching.
No, the question isn't that. My question is what is teaching. We'll get there.
Right.
My question is, do you think without Titus being translated that way, this would be the discussion? There would be any discussion on this whatsoever? It's not a rhetorical question.
Okay,
It's a real question. I'm curious because I don't know. Maybe it would. I mean, people pull doctrines out of all kinds of places, so
Right.
possibly.
So, yes, I think so. Obedience, I see that in subjection, sooner or later, it's going to result in obedience.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay, we'll get there. Actually, that's somewhere I want to go to because you did bring that up,
Okay.
and I thought that was a good point. But before I don't want to lose things and leave all these empty strands. So
Yeah.
but going back, so I'm still unclear on how obedience.
How would come up with obedience?
No. I can't assume anyone could. There's no way to know. It's just to me is interesting to bring up and say. If we don't have, when you have to me, you have one main verse, that's Titus. And without Titus, I don't know that this would ever, I think we would be talking about submission and we would not be talking about obedience. I don't think First Peter would.
That's fine. I would agree with that.
Right.
I don't put, I guess I brought up obedience because that's what the word that was brought up in the conversation.
Right.
And so
But that's my thing.
submission.
Well, I don't have like I said,
but-
I think we're 100% simpatico on submission.
Okay.
And I think all the women in all
So
the
let me
churches
ask you this.
that are not liberal are simpatico.
I guess
on it.
I would ask you this. Is obedience at all a part of submission?
Okay, so Before, like I said, I want to get there,
Okay.
but I want to close the loop on the
Yeah.
previous one, and that is what exactly is obedience? Because if not, we're going to just be talking around each other if we don't at least, we don't have to agree on that definition, but we have to understand what we're both saying when we say the word and where we might disagree on how we're using the word. We don't have to agree. We can disagree as long as we understand our disagreement, and then we can find, we can meet up and not be going around circles. So the difficulty I had with how you presented obedience is that it just seems so meaningless, right? It's like obedience is not mindlessly doing what you're told. Well, then what is it? Because what's the point of thought if in the end you do what you're told?
Let me explain maybe why it's not
Sure.
mindlessly.
Okay.
Because there is a higher up hierarchy, I guess, which is
Right.
God.
Okay.
And so if my boss tells me one thing to do one thing, I can't mindlessly do what he tells me if there's another order that is higher up in succession.
Okay.
That would be that wouldn't be right. And so that's why I say it can't be mindlessly. It can't be my dad tells me to do something and I without thought always have to do what he tells
Okay,
me.
so let's put this into a different context then. Let's say you're a private in the Army. Your drill sergeant says, do this. But you know the captain, and you don't think he would have you do that. Let's say you know he wouldn't have you do that. What is obedience in that scenario? These are not analogous. I don't want you to feel like you're going to get your tail in the corner on this because I don't think that they're analogous. So just because it works one way in the Army doesn't mean it works that way in the marriage, okay?
Right.
That's how I see it. But obedience in the Army, I think you would agree that if the drill sergeant tells you to do something, it doesn't matter what you know the captain would say. You have to do what he tells you to do, the drill sergeant.
Unless you're willing to suffer the consequences.
No, but then that's not obedience.
Yes.
You would suffer because they would say that that's not obedience.
It wouldn't be obedience to him. Yes.
Well, if it wouldn't be
Right.
obedience in the Army.
Okay.
The Army would not.
Yes,
that
it wouldn't
would
be
be a
obedience
court
to the
martial.
army.
That would
I
not
would
be
agree.
obedience.
I
They
would
would say
agree.
you would say no, but I was obeying the captain.
I would agree.
Okay.
Yes,
So
that wouldn't be
do you think
obedience.
do you think that applies in any way to marriage?
If you don't obey your husband, yes, you would not be obeying him.
Okay, so then even if it's because God has told you something different, obedience is mindlessly doing what someone told you to do. And I don't mean mindless like you're stupid. I want to be clear because it sounds that way, and it's a loaded term,
Yes, it's hard.
right? So I don't want to. When I say mindless, I mean in a very technical sense, in that you have no right to consider it for yourself. Now you can think about it and say I don't like it, I don't agree with it, and I don't think that's disobedience. I think if I'm in the Army, let's use that example, and the drill sergeant says, do this, I can in my mind say I don't like it, I don't agree with it, I don't want it, whatever. And that is not disobedience. Disobedience is
The doing.
the doing.
Right.
In fact, like for instance, just take the two words. You got hupatasso, which is submit. That means under order, right? So like as in the order of things, right? As in levels, under order. And then you have the Greek word for the obedience, which is hupakao, which is under orders. Basically, akao means what you hear. So it's under command
Okay.
is what that means. So when you look at, there's, and they're very technical words because they've taken two very simple words and they've joined them together. Our word obey is etymologically is difficult to figure out what it means. It's a translation, but the Greek word is very technically what they've done. They've taken under, which is everyone knows it, hypo, like hypoglycemic or whatever. Under, and then they take whatever you're under and they just smash them together. That's the word. So it becomes very obvious what they're trying to say, or at least it seems obvious what they're trying to say. And obedience is technically actually means doing what you're told.
Okay. Yes.
That's
I would
what
agree.
it means.
I would agree.
So there is no way in which obedience. This is my problem.
But what happens whenever you're told something by two different people?
Okay, good. I thought I'm sorry. I got a thing from YouTube came up, and I thought it was saying that we've been canceled.
Yeah.
That we've been
There's
kicked
other
out.
things you can't talk about.
Yeah, like good grief, they don't like this one either. Yeah. Anyway, so all hierarchies work in which there's always something above,
Yes.
and in the top of every hierarchy is God.
Okay.
And not just in a spiritual or a doctrinal sense, but in a metaphysical sense, God is being the supreme being, if you want to call it that, the ultimate good. There's a lot of ways, the first cause, there's a lot of ways you could describe it. But what it means is that existentially, God is at the top of every hierarchy. He's the top of the army hierarchy, he's the top of the marriage hierarchy, he's the top of the hierarchy of the forest, of which trees get more nutrients. I mean, he is the top of all of those hierarchies, right?
Okay.
And then it goes down from there. But obedience is obeying whoever's on top of you. You can't
You mean obedience is obeying the first rank up?
up on top of you. That's right.
Okay.
You can't be obedient by skipping one. Now, you can be obedient under a different hierarchy that way. So this is how so the apostles, the people on top of them tell them, you can't preach. They say, we're in a different kingdom, essentially paraphrasing. We belong to a different kingdom. And in that kingdom, in the ministry we're doing is of that domain, you're not our authority. We're obeying our authority in this domain. So what they're telling the leaders is, you're outside your domain. You don't have a right to make these claims or these things.
I would say that applies the same with the wife and the husband. If he tells you to do something,
but is
that
what
is a
she
sin.
doing outside of her domain, outside of the marriage domain? See, that they couldn't say that to everything. So when they came and asked Jesus, "Do you pay taxes?" He said, or not Jesus. When they come and ask him, "What do we do with the coin for Caesar?" And he says, "Give to Caesar what's Caesar's." And we kind of take that to mean, in the domain, in what belongs to them, we obey. And Paul says it too. We obey our rulers and our leaders. He's obviously saying within their domain.
Okay.
This is the.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry, it's just
No,
there's
no,
so
go
many
ahead.
things.
No,
right?
I agree. No,
and also because that word hupotasso is subject. You're subject to the authorities.
No, you're under order. There's a difference. It means you're under order. It means it means you're in a hierarchical structure. That's what it means.
So, for example,
Sure.
Hebrews 13.
Okay.
There he talks about. He says, where am I? Let me see. Remember them which have rule over you, who have. No, that is not what I'm looking for. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But he says to be subject.
If the internet was so slow, I'd already found it.
Yeah.
Problem is, there's not a good, I know I got to say this, there's no good Bible program
Yeah.
anymore. They're all
You have
garbage.
to say that
Every
single
time I touch
you
it.
touch the Bible.
Be subject to principalities and powers. I don't know which one. I don't find one. Subject isn't only one time. He's subject to bondage.
That's not.
You don't remember more what it
I'm
said?
probably thinking of a different one.
Okay.
Anyway,
Go ahead and make the argument.
it's that when he's speaking about being that you're supposed to obey the rulers, it also uses that word subject.
Right.
When he's saying you're not supposed to,
Okay. So,
cause problems.
well, that was where you were kind of wanting to go. So let's talk about the connection between submission and obedience, and if there is a
Yes.
connection. Okay.
Yes.
So, submission. This is how I'll explain how I see it. So submission is different than obedience. They're not the same thing.
Okay.
One is your position in a hierarchical structure, and the other one is doing what you're told to do specifically. So one is abstract, much more abstract, not mean more real, but it's more abstract, and one is much more tangible. It's doing what you're told, and it is being in a hierarchical structure, which means that you submit your will, you order. Is it necessary? Is obedience necessary for submission to be true? Now, the problem I have with saying yes to that, just on a philosophical point of view, is that if you say that, then submission becomes nothing. Because without obedience, there's no submission. So submission itself has no meaning as I see it. Obedience has all the meaning. And so then you really don't have two terms. You have a place in which one term can happen, not two different things. You don't have submission and obedience. And so then I look at it and I think, and this is why I had a hard time making a steel man argument for this, because I think, well, is there anywhere where you are required to be submissive but not obedient, other than marriage? I think marriage is that scenario, but that's begging the question. Okay, so other than marriage, and I would say yes. I think you would even agree with me. So I would say that we agree in plurality of elders, which means they are mutually submissive. That's what he says. Submit yourselves one to another. Do elders obey each other?
Right.
And then I would say no. That I submit to the elders, they submit to me, but we do not obey each other.
So again, it's difficult, all this. What is obey? I think, because again, I think just doing what somebody else, doing what you're told, right? That doing what you are told is
That's how
our
I would
definition
define it.
of. But what about just doing what the other person's will is?
Well, that's not the same thing.
Okay.
In fact, they could be opposite.
Okay, so exactly.
Especially like with elders, I could be acting in accordance to your actual will but you've said to do something different.
This is my point. Is I think that when you do something that is the will, without it being explicitly told to you, then
But see,
that is also obedience.
no, it's not that explicitly told. It could be explicitly told differently. I can be acting, let's put it in the context of the elders so that we're not begging the question here. I can be working as an elder with other elders in accordance with the will of the eldership, but not according to what one of the elders has told me to do. Actually against what they want done. Say what they say they want done, what the orders that they give. I do not want that, but the will of the eldership is that. And I could be working in accordance with the will. I could be submissive, not rebellious, submissive to the eldership, but not obedient to an elder. You see what I'm saying? This isn't just that there's absence of command and therefore you can work as you think is most compatible with the will of the husband. Mission goes much further, it's much broader than just doing what you're told. But that's what obedience is. I don't see any way a woman can say, or anybody, but let's keep it in this context. A woman can say, I am obedient to my husband, and I think about what he says to do, and if I think he's right, I do.
Okay, so your boss asks you to do something, and you decide whether
Tells me to do something.
tells you to do something.
Yeah, that's the liberal speak. We're going to ask you to pay more
He
taxes.
tells you to do
We're going to ask me, no, thank you. Yeah.
So your boss tells you to do something.
Okay.
You choose. Every single time your boss tells you to do something, you're making a choice. You are actually deciding. You are weighing what he's telling you to do.
Okay, but
And
that is not an argument for obedience.
Yes, that you're obeying.
No, but if you say, I will do what you tell me to do when I think it's right, that's not obedience. Even if you actually think he's right every time. It's still not street. And there happens to be a stop sign on the right-hand side right there. Did I obey the stop sign? No. I felt like stopping. Because submission is not doing what you're told.
I agree, but whenever
It's saying,
if your wills are aligned, you don't have to be.
the question is when they're not.
The question
So,
is
so
when
when
they're
you
not.
say, a woman says, I do what my husband says when I think he's right, well, that means you have to go to the points where they're not, when it doesn't happen, even if it's hypothetical.
Okay.
So even if the example you think in your mind of a woman, she's never done it. But if her mind is, if I ever think he's wrong, I don't have to do that, then she's not obedient. She just happens to agree all the time. I'm obedient to everybody I agree with. Whenever anybody says, eat apple pie, I obey.
So, okay, let's say this is why I think obedience comes out in submission. And that's because we see Jesus. He has a will, and his will is differing from the Father's will.
Mm-hmm.
He says, let this cup pass from me.
Okay.
He has a different will.
Okay.
But he ends up doing the will of the Father.
but that would be the matter of obedience. But the matter of submission is that he not only does what he's told, but he subjugates his will to a different will. Those are different things.
But it's
They're monumentally different. When a child begrudgingly cleans his room because he's told to, he's obedient. When a child keeps his room clean because he knows this matters to his mother, that's submission.
yes, but he ends up doing what he's told.
In this instance, it doesn't always work out that way.
Okay, well, see, that's where
Okay, so let me ask you this. Let's get to
that's
some.
what's
Let's
hard,
get
because
down
it
some.
does say that Jesus was obedient.
Yes, I'm not saying he wasn't obedient, but it doesn't mean that submission and obedience are the same thing. We
Okay.
can find a lot of
I
things
agree
that
that
happen
they're not the same
at the
thing.
same time. Okay,
But there's got to be there's some connection there.
at times, but not in all hierarchies.
Okay.
So, for instance, do you think that elders obey each other? Let's just use that one. To me, that's a good example.
Right.
You have 3 elders. Who obeys who? They all obey each other. How does that work? Or do they have a purely submission-based hierarchy?
Purely submission based.
Yeah, in other words, there's no obedience in the equation. I don't see how that would even work. How they obey each other in any meaningful way. Forget about the semantical orthodoxy of putting the word in there, because we got to have the word in there. And say, explain to me how it could meaningfully work, where 3 elders obey each other.
Well, it would have to come down to exactly specific decisions. I mean, if there's not a decision and something being said has to be done, then we're never going to have to put into practice that submission.
No, not submission, obedience.
Obedience.
They're different.
Okay.
I believe elders submit to each other. I don't believe they obey each other. I don't see how that could work. I've been an elder for a long time, and I cannot imagine. I tried really hard to figure out a way in which I could make the case and argue for that. And I could not figure out any way in which that could make any meaningful hierarchy of eldership, where you have elders, that you have equal elders and they obey each other. Or and in that sense, any scenario like that, where you have equality of
yes.
membership.
But that's the thing is, obedience, like you said, is to somebody.
No, you can obey anybody. Obedience can be to someone under you.
Yes.
That's what's crazy about this. It's just doing what you're told. You can obey anybody.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I would say that when the apostles obeyed the rulers like Paul prescribed, they were obeying people under them, not over them.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with, I don't have a problem with the word obedience. I don't have a problem with me saying, well, I'm going to listen to, hearken to somebody and do what they say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't either.
Okay.
If it's prescribed.
If it's prescribed, that's fine.
Well,
I
that's
guess
the
I'm
question.
trying to figure out where we're.
So the problem I have with obedience in marriage is not because I think it's demeaning. I think obedience is perfectly noble if it's prescribed.
Yes.
So if a daddy is obeying his little girl, who every time she yells, he does whatever she wants, I don't think that's noble. I think that's terrible, right? But when a young man obeys his father, I think that's very noble because it's prescribed. If the Bible prescribes that women do what they're told by their husbands, I think it would be a perfectly noble thing. I have no visceral reaction against it.
Okay.
Like I said in my 10-man argument, that women obey men all the time without anybody having even blinking an eye about it. Mm-hmm. Right? And when I used to teach this, and I used to teach what I argue against now, that was one of my big arguments. It's like women say, well, I can't obey a man. We obey men all the time. You got your little Pilates instructor, your little spinning instructor, if they go there, and he's there like, now let's get it going. And they're all in there pedaling away, and he's yelling at them, and and they think it's wonderful. And they're being told what to do by a man. And their boss is a man, and they got all these men in their life that tell them what to do, and they do what they're told. So the idea that a female cannot obey a male, and somehow that's untoward, well, that's just wrong. That's not the question. The question is it prescribed in the marriage? Is that the marriage relationship that the Bible prescribes? That women do what they're told? No, that's what I have an issue with. And I think that almost all evangelicals have an issue with it because they always qualify it.
Yeah, well.
They say, well.
They do what they're told. But again, I go back to, so let me try to take this out of
Sure.
not wives to their husbands, children to their parents.
Okay.
I still don't see that children obey their parents without, a thought.
I do. I think children do
So
what
if
they're
your
told.
parent tells you, go kill this person over here, you just do it without thinking?
Well, I think most kids do, yes. I think that
Okay,
that
but
is
is
the
that
hierarchy. So
prescribed?
I'm not. I think that the obedience without being able to judge it is prescribed. It does not mean it can't be abused. And I would tell a child disobey, but it would be disobedience.
Oh, I would agree.
Okay, but then,
But that doesn't mean that.
but is a woman
it's not
disobeying when she doesn't do what she's told by her husband? See,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. So there
You
we
understand what I'm saying?
go. There we
I'm
go.
not-
That's
So when the apostles, when the apostles are told, do not preach, they disobeyed.
they did disobey. I would
They
agree.
disobeyed. They could not then say, no, we obey the authorities.
No, they disobeyed.
They disobeyed. That's
Right.
right. And the prescription in the scriptures for that situation is obedience.
Is obedience.
That's right. And yet they said, we have a reason why we're going to disobey, but you can't say they were obedient then.
Perfect. I would agree with
So
that too.
but then in marriage then you're exactly where I'm at,
Okay.
only without the semantical
Okay.
orthodoxy.
So does a woman have to or obey?
I don't believe a woman should think of marriage as her relationship is obeying her husband. No.
Let me ask you this: does the father, or sorry, the husband, have a position of responsibility towards the family as the head, which he's going to account for?
Sure.
And that means if he makes a decision and
Well,
the wife,
but
okay.
that's assuming that position is about making the decisions, like somehow he's exclusively responsible for them. I don't think that's how the marriage works.
You don't think that he's exclusively
I
responsible?
do not think the man is exclusively responsible. I think, and there's this phenomenon I've noticed as I've dealt with this subject, that the most opposed to me on this are women, not men, which is very interesting to me, right? You would think I'd be kind of like the Moses, right? Leading the people free. But no, women are the most opposed to this discussion. And one reason why I think that is, there's a number of reasons. My wife tells me that one reason is because they've prided themselves for a long time on that being ennobling to them. And so when I come and say this, they feel like I'm stripping this away, and they think that I am demeaning their whatever they've done that way.
Well, when you
So-
read that Sarah obeyed Abraham and you hold her as your
Right.
example, then
Exactly.
you
It's
would have
that. My point is that they have very noble reasons, and I would say those are the biggest reasons.
Okay.
But they also have another reason, and I think this is I don't want. And the reason I put that in preface is because I don't want it to sound like I think everything is ignoble or cynical. I think the majority is noble, but there is another point, and this is the one I want to bring out because I think women should be aware of this. They're lazy. Everybody is. It's not just
Yes.
women, but they're lazy. They don't want to be responsible,
Right.
right? They want to be told what to do. Most people do. This isn't just about women. Very few people want to start their own business. Very few people actually want to be the manager of the store. Very few people actually want to be CEO. They talk about it. They want the paycheck. They don't want that response. And the moment they had it, they would quit. Most people do not want that. They just want to be told what to do.
Yes.
Okay, and I think that is a big reason why there's objection to this from women, because they don't want to think that they are also responsible. Because I grew up around this. You know my family, right? They're like the mega submissive family, and the women is like this. You get married into my family, the one side of my family, and that's the talk you get. You know, some people get the sex talk. In my family, if you're a woman, you get married to this family, you get the, stand by your man talk. And the idea is he makes the decision, you do what you're told, and if he messed up, it's all on him. All on him, you're free and clear. Now, I'm simplifying it, and I'm exaggerating it a tinge.
So you you don't think they actually say that? That it's all on them?
No, they do.
Oh, they do.
Yes, they do.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm not in those words. It'll be a little. I'm making it brutal.
Okay.
Okay, I am blunting the point of the sword to make the point, but it's not much better. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you I am exaggerating by a tinge. I really am.
Okay.
I grew up around this.
Right.
I have a lot of experience with this, and I'm not saying that everyone who thinks this, who's on that side of the Rubicon, sees it that way. I'm talking about my family. I'm going to be very clear. I'm very specific here. That, in my opinion, is a terrible doctrinal position. I believe that marriage is a partnership. That does not mean there's not a hierarchy.
Okay.
But it is a partnership. And we are all in it. And I say all, there's only two. But
Yes.
they are both in it together. And they're both accountable for how they raise their kids.
Real quick. So if you take the position that a woman should obey her husband, then they're no longer in it together.
No, I would say no. Not if you're not doing semantical orthodoxy. So if all you're trying to do is get the word obey into the conversation, into the discussion, you just got to get that word in, and it can mean anything you want it to mean afterwards. That we just got to get it. We just got to say the word. I obey. Okay, I obey. It doesn't mean anything. It can mean anything you want it to mean. Anything the pastor says it means. It's just very open. Well, then,
Right. But if you give it the definition that
if it means something specific,
obey means you do what I say, or you're
do what I say. No,
disobedient.
there's no or. There doesn't have to be forced to be obedience.
Right.
That's I want to be
with
clear
what,
on that.
what Nolan is saying. If it's obedience, then they're not in it together. But then we got Jesus dying on the cross. It wasn't.
No, he wasn't. This was the will of the Father.
And so it's just
You yourself said. Now I'm not necessarily agreeing doctrinally, theologically with how you represented it. I'm not disagreeing. I'm just not sure. To me, this is very complex. But to simplify it to this argument, to this discussion, you yourself said it wasn't Christ's will. He did it because it was the will of the Father, and he obeyed. In so much as this conversation, I would never want to be held to that on a theological discussion pertaining to the Trinity.
Yes.
Okay. But in this discussion, taking that at face value, then I could stipulate that. I could stipulate to that point, but then that's what that point is saying. That point is saying that Christ was not in it with the Father in that way. The Father had a will. The will of the Son was anything else is better than this. I don't want this.
Well, he said, "Not my will,
but not my will.
That's the thing.
But yours
when
be
he
done.
says,
So
"But
I will
yours
obey
be done,"
your will.
I obey your will, and now we're in it.
No, that's not what it says. That's what you want.
No. I'm saying he did it.
Well, yes, I'm not saying women don't obey and don't interact, but when I'm saying we're in it together means we're both equally responsible for the decisions. But I think
Both
most
obedience
equally
camp, responsible for the decisions.
Yes.
So you don't think the man is held with any more responsibility than the woman?
Not in this this context, no. Now we could nuance it and say, to much is given, much is required, and there's probably some level or some degree in which men are more responsible in some ways. But to me, that'd be a very hard case to make.
So what does it mean
from
when
my
it
perspective.
when it does the whole hierarchy thing? The husband is the head of the and the Christ. Is the head of the,
right, but so that's a good question. So here's where I think is important to understand this. This is why this isn't about liberating women. I don't think women need to be liberated. First off, this is about saying what is submission really, right? If obedience is taken out, and it's actually not part of the marriage. Now, there's submissions that are obedience is part of them, right? Depending on the hierarchical context. In the army, children, servants, obedience is part of those.
so it's part of it always, except
Not always.
in marriage.
No, there's many where it's not.
Okay.
It's not part of eldership. I don't think there's any part of obedience in eldership where we submit to each other. I don't think it's part of friendship. I don't think it's part of the church body. It says we all submit one to another. In Ephesians, right where it talks about women submitting to their husbands,
Yes.
it says everyone submit. Does that mean we all obey each other?
Well, whenever we get down to the example of Jesus,
No. Do we all obey each other?
that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So whenever we read, submit one to another. That takes me right to thinking of Philippians,
Okay.
right? He says we need to esteem one another, have the mind of Christ, esteem one another. He's talking about, I think, that idea of submission.
Yes, submission,
It's
yes.
esteeming the one above, right?
Yes.
You're putting in the one above.
Put yourself under order.
And he explains how that was accomplished in Jesus. And the end result is, what did he do? He was obedient.
That's not what it says in Philippians, is it?
Yes, Philippians 2.
What does it say? He was obedient, and that was the submission? And that's how we're to submit to each other? We're to obey each other?
So he says, this is what I'm saying, right? So you esteem one another. 2 verse 3. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind. Let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the other things of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ. So again, I think he's talking about that hierarchical, you're putting somebody above
Yes,
yourself.
I agree with all that. That's
Okay,
submission.
so,
Okay.
who being in the form of God thought not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself low reputation. He's explaining what this looks like, I think.
Okay.
This is what submission looks like.
Okay.
Made himself no reputation, humbles himself, was made like a man, being in the fashion of man. He humbled himself, became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross.
So you're saying that the way that we submit to each other is by obeying each other in the church?
Humbling ourselves
That's not what I asked.
and ultimately
No.
obeying, yes.
So how do you obey the people in the church? This isn't obeying the elders. This is obeying everybody in the church. Everybody in the church obeys everybody else.
Right. Well, that would have to be.
No. I'll save you. No, that's not. That is not at all what he's saying there. He's saying that we have a mindset. Christ Jesus had a mindset. And the mindset of Christ was, even though he had every right to consider himself equal with God, he didn't do that. And we see that he didn't do that when he became obedient unto death, which was not his will, but the Father's. And we see that. He's not saying everyone has to obey each other. He's saying we all need to learn to put ourselves under.
Yes.
It doesn't mean
so
that
how
it
do you
goes.
manifest,
It doesn't mean
how
it
do you
happens
manifest that you put yourself under somebody?
by esteeming them higher than yourself, by considering
so I tell
by
you,
considering their best interest over your own.
So I tell you what my best interest is.
No, it doesn't have to be because you tell me. This is reducing submission down to a extreme oversimplification. It is turning submission into obedience.
Okay.
Because obedience is super simple. Obedience is super simple. Do what you're told. I don't find it to be, I can't figure out any way in which it's a nuanced or complicated idea.
Okay.
But submission I find to be an extremely grand idea. Magnificent idea. Not
Let me
that
ask you
obedience
this.
is
Let me
bad. I
ask
want
you
to be
this on
clear.
obedience.
I'm not saying obedience is bad. I want to be
I
very clear
understand,
on
I
this.
understand.
I love obedience. Obedience is a wonderful thing, but it's a super simple one. And submission is this huge, endless idea. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. Again, I'm not sure. I guess this is what we're talking about. I do think that obedience is in there, and obviously you've talked about yes in a few ways, but in others not. But boy, I don't know where I was.
Well,
That
well,
got
you
away
think
from
that's
me.
fine. No, it does me. It
Well,
does me all the time.
Before y'all go, we have
ahead.
a lot of questions here.
Oh, really? Well, let me
Okay.
try to close this loop real quick.
Sweet.
So, what I would make clear is, I believe obedience is required in certain hierarchies.
Okay.
They are obedience hierarchies, and there's other ones that are not.
Would
And they
you
have
call-
to be prescribed. And wherever they're prescribed, obedience is wonderful, noble, and it is not demeaning. But when it's not prescribed, it is a demeaning thing because it ruins the hierarchy.
Okay, I would agree. Now, would you say, because I wouldn't look at eldership as a hierarchy. I think that is we're all common. Now, I think we need to esteem one another. We need
Okay.
to put ourselves in with that esteem. But I don't think there is a hierarchy in that plurality of eldership.
So here's a difference on how we're using the word hierarchy. So we
Okay.
ought to clarify that. You're using it from a religious perspective, where you have hierarchy, thinking of pope, cardinals, bishops, that way hierarchy. I'm using it from a I hate the word, but let's just say an evolutionary perspective or a biological perspective or a philosophical. I don't know how you would call it. But I'm looking at everything as a hierarchy. Everything is.
Okay.
Because everything, there's always something first. Because we live in a world, it's what the speed of light's about. It's about the causational speed at which things can happen. Things can happen faster than the speed of light because there has to be order to things. And that order, and that's the issue of marriage. The very fact that something happens before something else puts it first in that sense, right? And so men are hierarchical above women because they were created first. That was the argument I made in the 10-man argument, which I think is a right argument. I think
What
it's
about God being the head of Jesus?
But because the Father is first. In some way. It doesn't mean he has to be created. He's not created, but he is first. In that all things he might have the preeminence. It's that he's first. But everything is hierarchical. It doesn't mean that it's hierarchical in the same way as you think of the Pope and then the cardinals and then the bishops. And they have hierarchical authority. It doesn't mean that Nolan's getting irritated with me because I'm not being short and brief.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No,
What are
you're
you
good. No,
Okay.
keep going. Whatever. No.
Okay, anyways, I'm not saying you have to agree with that, but that when I say hierarchical structures, I don't mean who's on top in that very, how would I put it, in that very obvious sense. Trees are hierarchical. Ants are hierarchical. Grass grows hierarchically. Everything, everywhere you look, it's all hierarchical structures.
There's something first.
There's something first. Things happen before others.
Okay, I agree. There's
and
an order. There's an order to everything.
Right, and so then you have to look at every hierarchical structure and determine what is that order like. And there's all different ways in which that orders work. And to prescribe into a hierarchical structure, like let's say obedience, when obedience is not part of it, ruins both the structure and obedience. That's my problem with putting obedience into marriage. It ruins obedience. Because you're telling women, and I've done it and you have too, and practically everybody I know that argues for this has done it, and you're telling women, don't obey this, and don't obey that, and don't obey the other. Let me just ask you some questions. You don't even have to answer them if you don't want to, but just more, maybe they're rhetorical. You can answer them if you want, but I would assume they're rhetorical. Does a woman have to obey her husband in how she votes? If the husband tells her, vote Democrat, or vote Republican, or vote whatever, does she have to obey her husband in voting? Does a woman have to obey her husband in sex? Is the husband's authority and obedience part of the marriage in the bedroom? Does a woman have to obey her husband in I won't even go to the obvious, sensationalistic like crimes. Obviously, we say, but I mean it does come in. It's like, is she disobedient to her husband? If he says go commit a crime and she says no, is that disobedience? Well, it is if you make obedience part of marriage.
Well, again, I would say, okay.
If you tell me, go commit a crime, and I say no, I'm not disobedient.
Right.
We have a submission relationship in which obedience is not a part of it. And you can tell me to do any crazy thing that comes in your mind, or I could tell you that would probably be more realistic. I could tell you any crazy thing that comes into my mind, and you can say, no.
I might go do it.
You're like, okay, I'll be right back. No, don't do that. And yet that doesn't mean that you are not submissive to me as a brother in Christ. When I go to the church and someone in the church is trying to tell me what I should and should not do, I can be submissive to them without obeying a single word they're saying.
Right.
Because I am not putting myself above them. I'm simply saying I don't have to obey you. And I know that's difficult.
Okay,
it's hard.
I agree with
It's hard to imagine how you can be submissive and not be actually obedient. All right.
That is the difficulty.
It is. No,
it is the what I would like to understand.
I agree. Let's let Nolan
Yeah,
in. He's over here.
got
He's
a lot
over
of-
here like the little retarded boy. Like
That is
That's
politically just not right.
Yeah.
You shouldn't say that.
did we get banned or did we get kicked off?
Not yet. You keep saying that word. Okay, so we have a lot of questions.
Holy smokes!
Yeah.
You're not kidding.
Yeah, so let's try and answer
yeah,
these
go for
quickly and precise.
Well, why don't you pick some out?
Okay, I'm gonna pick some out.
Yeah,
okay,
you can't do
so, so Jesus submit. This is Eva, carpenter. So Jesus submitted by paying tax, but did not obey.
Right. He didn't have to obey. He actually was above them.
It's above that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So y'all both agree on that.
I'd have to think about that. That's a hard one because of how Christ worded it. So I don't know.
Okay.
He said he did it so he wouldn't offend them. So I would
wouldn't
say
offend
that he didn't obey, he submitted.
Okay.
That's what I would word that actually.
Well, how would you put that, Stephen?
Yeah. I mean, that's fine.
You okay with that? Y'all agree with that?
I think Christ was very clear. I'm the son. I don't have to do it. I'm not doing it by obedience. I don't want to offend them. So I think Christ, who could be greater than them, put himself under them, submitted to them, but didn't obey them. Even though he did what they wanted him to do, it wasn't obedience. See, that's a crazy thing.
So
Just
doing what somebody did.
But not doing. If you're doing something, it's like I gave the stop sign idea. If you stop at a stop sign, not aware that it's there, you can't say you obeyed the stop sign. Technically, yes, but you didn't obey it. You didn't see it and say, I'm going to do what I'm told to do. You just happened to stop on the road, and there happened to be a stop sign there. And there could be other reasons why you might stop, unrelated to whether you obey the law. Anyways,
Okay.
that gets us into the weeds.
Yeah, that will get us into a different conversation.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, Debbie Kincaid. No, actually, one more before that. There is work in progress for him. So I don't know who that would be.
Here's a new one. Anyways.
Okay. Would you say that we obey God and His commandments?
Absolutely. We obey God. Our hierarchical structure with God is one of obedience and submission, completely.
What do you say, Stephen? Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great. Okay.
Let me ask something about that
Uh-huh.
while we're on that. Abraham obeyed God. Abraham obeyed.
Mm-hmm. Well, in as much as he did, you can point out places where he didn't, and that's disobedience.
Yes.
If you don't do what God says, then you're disobeying. I don't believe that there's any way in which you can, there is no structure in which God is not a hierarchical obedience structure. You have to obey God. And that is what we tell in marriage. We tell women, obey God. If your husband tells you to do something he tells you not to do. That means that the marriage relationship is not an obedience relationship.
So I know that in obedience, there's different reasons for obedience, right? You can obey because of force. I can force you to obey.
Would that be obedience?
Well,
if I'm getting forced to do it.
It depends. What do you mean by force? Like physically?
Well,
Like
that's the thing.
they grab your hand and do it? I mean,
Well, that's the
like
thing. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think that you may have psychological motivations for your obedience. It might be fear. Kids obey
Right.
out of fear at first, right? That they're going to get a
Yes.
spanking or going to get punished or whatever. And then it might be more out of love, in that you want to do it because you love your parents and you don't want to see them be hurt by your disobedience. And so now you're not worried that they're going to do something. You just don't want them to be disappointed, right? And so there's a lot of reasons why you might. But in the end, you're doing something that you're told to do. And it's not something that you were already going to do. It's not that you coincidentally did it as they asked you to. It's that you were told to do it. Anyways.
Well, like Christ there. I mean, he wasn't going to pay taxes.
No,
Then
he
when
said
it
he
came
shouldn't.
up, he ended up doing it.
He did it.
So he did obey.
But no, I don't think he did. I think he made it very clear, I'm not doing this to obey them. I think he made it clear, I'm doing this because I don't want them to be offended.
Yes, but you end up doing what has been told.
Okay, fine. But I think that you get into a position where it's like, to me, that's like with marriage. If the husband says, hey, I want you to do this, and the woman says, I don't really want to do that, but if it makes him happy and the marriage will go better and it's good for me, then yeah, that's fine. I'll just do it. Well, she's doing what she's told, but I don't think that's obedience. And that's not bad. I don't think there's anything wrong. If you said, hey, go get me a glass of tea, well, I could say, well, you can't tell me what to do. Or I could say, yeah, you're my guest, and I could have a million reasons why I could say, I'll do what you say to do. And then you say, well, you obeyed me. No, not. I mean, that's fine. You could look at it that way, and that's how I see it with Christ. I think the Pharisees looked at him and went, we showed him.
Oh, yeah.
He paid his taxes. We told him what to do.
I manned him.
Yeah, I manned him. That's how you say. I manned him.
Yeah, I manned him.
Read Debbie's.
Okay, so that was the next one.
Just the first one.
Yes. So Christ obeyed to death on the cross, but was not submissive.
No, he was both. You can be obedient and submissive. They're two separate things. They can be happen at the same time, that one can happen before the other before the other. They're different. They're separate things. And you can be obedient without being submissive.
How would
Christ
you
was
answer that,
submissive,
Stephen?
then obedient.
So my way of viewing it was that Christ was submissive, and the explanation of how he was submissive was obedience. So that's how I was viewing it.
Right.
Your explanation is submission is one thing and obedience is another thing.
Yes.
You can do both.
Yes. You can do one or the other.
Yeah.
Now, if the relationship requires obedience, and many do, you cannot be submissive technically without being obedient. You cannot be submissive to God and not be obedient to God, because that is involved in that.
Yes.
But I can be submissive to my co-elders without being obedient to them, because it's not involved.
That was my point when I was saying, I said hierarchy.
Right.
And but that was my point, is I don't think that amongst elders or amongst brethren we have that.
No, we don't. Exactly.
So we're not expected to.
It'd actually be wrong to.
It would be wrong to.
It would be wrong to. Same way in a democracy.
With a husband and wife, there is that.
That's the debate. I mean, that is begging the question. That's my point. I don't think it is. I don't see marriage. I see marriage to be like the eldership relationship, not like the father-child relationship. So the view that I was taught forever, and I'm not saying that this is I don't know that this is a really indicatively good view of people on that side. So I don't want to paint a bunch of people this way. But this is how I was kind of taught. It's the kids, the husband obeys God, the wife obeys the husband, the kids obey the parents. And it's like this triangle, God's on top, everyone falls underneath, and everyone's obeying whoever's on top of them all the way up. I don't think it's that way. I think that demeans the way God designed marriage. That is not to say that there is not under order, that there's not submission, and that submission is real, and it has to mean something. So I'm not saying let's just throw submission into the trash can, and women are exactly like men, and equal 50% on everything. Not at all. I mean, anyone who knows my marriage and knows my life knows that's not at all what me or my wife think. But I have changed dramatically in how I see things. So when we got married, and for a long time, my view was obey. She should do what I tell her to do. And then I started reading about it, researching it, and thinking about it, and I don't think any of us live that way. So that's what first problem I had with it. Practically speaking, getting out of the doctrinal weeds and just looking at it practically for a moment. My problem with the way, and I know you're kind of, we really needed to have an extreme version here, because you're not.
Yeah.
I understand that. But the problem with the other side of the aisle on this, the ones that really do think it, they don't live that way. Do you know a marriage that actually works that way? Where the wife does what she's told? I don't. And I don't mean that to be mean in any way, but I don't know one. And I know some of the most submissive women on the face of the earth. Let me give you an example. So when I started thinking about this, I talked to my granddad about it, who was, they were like gung-ho. And I said, what if the husband says, don't go to the meeting? He said she should obey. Oh, wow. What if he says, don't read the Bible? She should obey. He's the husband. It's his problem. He'll be judged. Wow, okay. So at least it's consistent, right? What if he says, don't pray? He says, well, he can't know that. So I'm like, well, wait a minute. Is it about what he knows, or is it about what you know? You know he said don't pray. Should you pray? And any way I tried to answer that brought me back to the point of, how is obedience actually part of the marriage then? If you can vote for whoever you want, if in the marriage bed in sex you are completely equal, if you can pray, go to the meeting, read the Bible, abstain from anything you consider to be illegal or immoral or unethical. What are you obeying?
So, I mean, yeah, it's how do we bring this into the practical life?
Well, I'll tell you how I think it's brought in, essentially. And there's more to it, but I think it brought in where the woman has to ask for every penny she wants to spend, and the man can go buy a boat.
Right. Well, see, so I disagree with that.
You don't think that's what happens in most marriages practically?
No. I know.
Oh, you're saying that's bad.
I'm saying the problem with this whole thing. So let's say, just going back, I looked at it and I said, I think the problem with this isn't, the obedience and all that. I think the problem is men don't know how to be leaders. Men don't know how to lead.
Okay.
Because I don't think, obedience is a problem. I think obedience can be, well, wait a minute, I disagree with you. Let's talk it out. We talk it out.
But what if they don't want to? See, this is where you have to get to the harsh edge of reality. So you're saying in an ideal marriage, we'd all discuss things. We'd both discuss it. We'd work it out. We'd reach agreement, and I would lead you through consensus.
In the end, I would make a decision.
Okay, and I would lead you through consensus, though. That's the ideal.
What do you mean lead by consent?
Meaning that you would agree. I would get you to agree with me.
Well,
we would
even
come to
if
agreement.
we don't come to an agreement.
No, I'm saying in the ideal thing. If your ideal marriage, I think you would say is, and I would too, is that we would talk about it. We would come to an agreement. We'd be completely simpatico on something, and we would go in that direction, and I would lead in that way. Okay? But that's the ideal.
Okay, yes.
But we have to go all the way to the part where obedience means nothing in that situation. If you have the ideal marriage, obedience is completely out the window. So then you're down to the point where
when you do it, it
then
still
you're gonna-
counts. See,
but it's not obedience.
I think it is because again, the relationship with Jesus was that Jesus he
didn't want to.
He didn't want to.
The ideal marriage that I presented was that you come to an agreement where you both have the same will.
No, well, I don't think we're ever going to both have the same will.
Well, no, right. That's why it's called ideal. So I'm saying, when I look at this, I have to say, I think people argue and establish this doctrine based on what they see as idealistic, how the man is going to lead idealistically. And then they try to retrofit those ideas that they pulled out of the utopia into reality, where that never happens. And when you do that, then that's where obedience doesn't work in a utopia. It doesn't work. It's like capitalism. It does not work in utopia. Your obedience is about restraining the negative, not exaggerating the positive. So you only need obedience when there is disagreement. That's the only time there can be obedience. But you can have
somebody that it's not a good or bad thing. It's not a right or wrong. They're just disagreeing. There's different.
I'm not even talking about right or wrong.
Right.
I'm giving you the very best benefit of the doubt and saying we're not even talking about crimes and unethical and morality. I'm just talking about complete disagreement where either one is fine. You have to make a decision.
Yes. And you say there's no obedience?
I'm saying obedience doesn't come into play. Submission does.
But that's what I'm saying is in that example, Christ did that. And it's called obedience.
I understand what you're saying. And so what you're saying is that because the relationship of the son and the father work that way, then the husband and the wife works the same way. So then, ergo, a wife really is no different than a child in that relationship.
I'm thinking that
children obey the dad, the wife obeys the dad. It's a father-son relationship.
Obedience is not a not a negative thing.
If you have, when you're in the army, that's the exact same thing you have. You're a drill sergeant, he's your dad. You do what you're told. That's the relationship. It's a father-son relationship in the sense of, you strip away whether dad loves son. It's not about that. It's about dad has a certain type of authority over the son. That's the relationship of the father with the son Christ.
And that's how you would say it was with the father with the son Christ.
Yes.
Do what you're told, and you don't even.
You have to do what you're told.
You don't
Yes,
even
the son
bring up
obeys.
your opinion. You don't even.
That doesn't mean you can't bring up your opinion.
Okay.
Saying I don't agree is not the issue. It's
Okay.
in the end,
In the end,
you do what you're told.
you do what you're told.
And the Father, as far
And
as
if
we
he
know,
would, so if Jesus wouldn't have done that,
he would have been
he would have
disobedient.
been wrong.
Yes.
He would have been disobedient.
Yes. Absolutely.
Right. He would have been okay.
Absolutely.
And that would
And
have
it would
been
have been, well, it'd been the end of everything we know. I mean,
Right.
that's
It
the
would
end
have
of the
been wrong.
Trinity. That's the end of everything.
Yes.
I mean, everything blows up and God is no longer God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was a critical moment. This not to
Yes,
overplay
no,
the issue,
right.
right?
It
But
is.
this was a critical moment. It's like poof, everything you know no longer exists, including God. It's like nothing. So,
Yes.
so this is why Christ's obedience was so critical.
Yes.
But that's a father-son relationship.
Okay, but see, this is where we go into. Okay, so we compare. Well, the father and the son, they're one. And we say,
No, we can't get into the Trinity on this.
but that's what always comes out because
No, it
you
doesn't
say,
have to
well,
come
the
up.
wife and the husband are one, and so it's a different
No.
relationship than with the
But they're
children.
not. The question is the husband and wife relationship a father-son type relationship? Is that the kind of If it is, and you can prove that it is to me, then I would agree. Then obedience is there,
Okay,
and
well,
then
it uses-
obedience is absolute. I have no problem saying that a woman should obey her husband. I don't have a problem saying a husband should obey his wife. I'm perfectly fine. If the Bible made it clear to me that I'm to obey my wife, fine. I know how to obey. I've obeyed my whole life. I obey all the time. I have no problem obeying. Well, okay.
Yes.
Theoretically, I have no
Yeah.
problem obeying. As a Christian, I have no problem saying I will obey. But is that what it says?
Right.
I don't think that what it's teaching women is that they're supposed to obey their husbands. I think they're supposed to submit. Yes. And that might mean doing something they don't want to do, but it's not because they were told to do it and they must. Why does this matter? Rhetorically, I'm going to and I'll explain why I think this matters so much to women. I think they have to realize that they are 100% involved in the marriage. You cannot say the decisions are the man's. It doesn't work. I don't mean it doesn't work like the marriage don't work. I mean, that idea
Right.
is wrong-headed. It's not what we're supposed to do. The marriage is joint.
Okay, let me ask you this
Okay.
with an example. The decision is not the man's. When Sarah, I think Abraham hearkened to his wife. He obeyed, right, her. But it was his decision. He did have to make that decision. So I do see that the husband is the one that has to make the decision. Sarah says, I'm not going to have this, bondwoman and that whole scenario in Genesis, right? And then God says to Abraham, because he was having a hard time with that. He didn't know what to do. And God says, listen and do it. But it was ultimately Abraham that had to make that decision
For himself, yes.
and do it.
But I'm saying it's the same thing with the woman. I believe women have a responsibility to act in the marriage as principal actors.
I agree.
And which means that obedience doesn't work if it's going to mean anything. You cannot be doing what you're told and at the same time exercising free thought.
Okay.
Now, I can exercise free thought and submit and say, I don't agree, but I'm going to let you lead on this and we're going to follow your direction.
And obey.
That's not obedience to me. Because I'm saying I don't agree. I'm going to follow with you. I'm not promising anything, but I am going to follow with you because I think I can also say as a woman, say no, absolutely not. That doesn't mean I'm not submissive. If a man tells a woman, you are not allowed to go to church anymore, I would tell that woman to tell him he's crazy. And if he thinks he can enforce the rule, try it. He'll find himself in prison. She has every right to say
Yes.
no. But I think she has every right to do that on anything. Now, the question is, what kind of marriage does a man and a woman want? This is why I say in practical terms, nobody lives this way. Every marriage I know that trumpets obedience do not live in obedience in any way. They live in submission. They work together. They work together. They come together. They talk together. They reach decisions. And the husband leads in them. Those are most of the marriages I know.
Okay. But again,
Except when it comes to money. And then it's like the woman has to obey. It's about the only place where I see this actually plays out in real life.
but see, I think that to me just,
Do you think a husband has to give an account of money to his wife? What did you spend? Why did you spend that? Do you think you have to say, hey, I want to go buy this boat or this car or this motorcycle?
I think husband and wife
Do you think she has to
should come
ask?
to agreement.
And so what if
together.
she says, I don't want you to buy a motorcycle? I mean in the ideal sense. Can a husband say, I'm going to buy a motorcycle and you can't say anything about it? It's my money to spend how I want. And you have to obey.
Okay.
Or if she says, I don't
Can
want
he
you to
do
spend
that? Yes, he can.
doctrinally. Obviously, physically he can. I'm asking if doctrinally he can. If you were a pastor and a man said, I'm the man of the house. If I want to buy a motorcycle and she doesn't want me to, she can't say no. But if she wants to buy a pair of shoes and I don't want her to, she can't buy them. You agree with that?
Okay, so I guess if you're, yeah, because you will give account for that decision to God. In other words, you do.
So
make
you think
the
that
decision.
you think that's the case? You think that so then our laws are completely wrong because our laws basically say no, that's joint property. Actually, you don't have that legal authority.
Right.
But you're saying that no, the laws are wrong. And doctrinally, biblically, a man can spend anything he wants on anything he wants so long as it's not obviously untoward, legal, and not immoral. But a man can spend anything he wants and doesn't have to get permission at all. A woman cannot spend a penny without permission. That's a father-son relationship. I don't think that's a marriage relationship. I think men are just as accountable to their wife as their wife is to the husband in money, in sex, in raising the children. I don't think the husband can say, this is how we're going to raise the children. And you implement it. You do what you're told. Now, I know they may not say it in those words. I'm blunting it to make the point, right? It's
Right.
a little bit of hyperbole. But
No, that's fine. That's good.
yeah. So I don't think that raising children, that a husband has absolute say over how children are raised. But if it's an obedience relationship, he does. If obedience means anything. Because, and this is the thing, I'm open. If you can give me a definition for obedience that is specific and solves a problem,
Yeah.
then I'm willing to go semantically orthodox and say obedience when I talk about marriage. But I am not going to play semantics. It has to mean something. It has to have a specific definition that I can apply to marriage and
At all
actually
times.
Yes.
Yeah. That.
Otherwise,
I see why
we're just playing with
it's
words.
difficult.
Otherwise, we're just playing with words because it doesn't fit. Now, if you tell me, does a private have to obey his drill sergeant? Absolutely, every single time. And we can get into war crimes, and there may be a small exception, and it would still be considered disobedience. He would still be court-martialed,
Yeah.
whatever. But we
You'd be
understand that. There are relationships where obedience is absolutely 100% prescribed. There's no way around it. That's the way they are. And there's nothing less noble about those relationships. Responsibility. And I think they like it.
So that's fine. What I'm understanding, which is where I was kind of unsure of,
Uh-huh.
but this clears up why. When it calls the husband the head, that does not mean he has more responsibility, or that he is going to give more accountability for
I wouldn't
how
say
he runs.
I wouldn't say that it doesn't
the
mean more.
marriage.
Obviously, it would mean more because to much is given, much is required. But it doesn't mean he has exclusive responsibility and accountability.
Okay,
Like for instance,
I
a
don't think
sergeant would be more
exclusive.
accountable than a private, but it doesn't mean a private isn't accountable also for his own decisions. He is. They are also,
right. So
and that's even in a place where obedience counts. But
exactly.
But like in eldership, I think that elders who have been elders for a longer time are more accountable than elders that are fresh out of the block. I just do, because I think that's why we're told. I mean, he says those that rule well are worthy of double honor. So they get more, they're more accountable. It doesn't mean they have more
Okay, so
authority to
in
demand or
this
command.
in this scenario, then a woman could have more accountability than the man in the
No.
marriage.
No, because she's not above order. That's submission.
That's what I'm saying. If there is, you said if there is an order, then you have to, obedience is required.
No, there's order in everything. That's submission. Submission is order. Obedience is doing what you're told. Not all order requires obedience. There's plenty of, and I give you these, like in elders is my main example. You have an order, and there is an order there. He says the younger submit to the older, talking about elders. So there is an order in a way, and yet there is an obedience. The younger elders are told by Peter to submit to the older elders. But it doesn't mean they have to obey him. A younger elder does not have to obey an older elder. That would be religious hierarchy. What were you going to say?
Yeah.
No, I just wanted you. I didn't think you finished your thought earlier when you.
Which one? I don't finish a lot of thoughts.
Just when you were trying to explain what you thought where the disagreement was.
Right, and so that is the thing is what that means to be that the husband is. So I always thought it was quite clear that there is more accountability for the husband because he's the husband.
Yeah, I would agree. I absolutely agree
But
with
then
that.
how is...
But it doesn't mean he has soul accountability.
Okay, I
But
agree.
in her
There's no
obedience, you would
soul
have soul accountability.
No.
Yes, you would.
Soul accountability.
Sure.
And where? I'm sorry.
If I tell you well, no, you're a grown man, but if you were a little
Right,
child
I
and I tell you, I'm your dad, do this, I'm solely accountable. Kid isn't held accountable. He's doing what he's told.
So then what's the whole point?
Is there an age that matters?
Well, in the father-son one, it's when
Yes,
you
in the
quit being
father-son.
it's when you quit being father-son. Well, like I am with my dad.
So
I'm
like,
no longer in a father-son relationship with my father. He doesn't tell me what to do. If he tells me to do something and I don't agree, I don't do it, and I'm not being
So
disobedient.
would you say that's marriage?
Marriage is like
When you leave, you leave your
you're
father
a
and
grown,
mother.
when you're
Okay.
adults.
But
Yes.
then what if you're 18, 16? You
Well, it's
have
not-
soul accountability there still?
It's not a matter of age. It's a matter of what the relationship you're in is. And there is a myriad, perhaps infinite reasons what would change that. And culturally, there's all kinds of things. Like culturally, you might not be a grown adult and consider an adult till you're 30. And so therefore, until you're 30, you're in a father-son type. I'm using that just because it works. But you're in the obedience relationship, and you obey those there. And when you transcend that for whatever reason, it doesn't matter why. But when you legitimately transcend it, you're no longer there, and obeying in that scenario is no longer meaningful. If I pride myself in obeying my dad today, that is not a good thing. That's no longer virtuous. Mm-hmm. That is actually bad. This is the problem with so many marriages that we've dealt with in other places, where the son is still obeying the mother, and he's 40. That's never good. He's like, well, she's my mother. This is their argument. It's like, well, she's my mother. Biologically. But she's not your authority. You should not be obeying her. It doesn't mean, see, everyone has this monkey dichotomous brain where it's like, if I'm not obeying her, then that means I'm purposely doing everything opposite of what she says. No. You might be doing exactly what she wants you to do. But it isn't because she wants you to do it. It's just because you happen to be aligned for whatever reason. You might leave here and do exactly what I want you to do today. It doesn't mean you're obeying me.
So
that's not even submission. That's just coincident. Now, submission is where you might come to me and say, or I might come to you and say, Stephen, I respect you a great deal, and I want your advice on something. And you give me your advice, and then I go do it. And then you say, well, Mike obeyed me. No, I submitted to you. It's important to understand the distinction.
So,
Go ahead.
Bill says, I'm assuming WRK.
Yeah.
Okay. Obedience is the action of submission. Titus 3:1.
Well, I disagree.
Right. So my there would be First Peter, because that's where we talk about obey. First Peter 3:5 when he says, who trusted in God adorned themselves, being in subjection unto their own husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham. It seems like it's tying it. This is
Okay.
how she was subject to her own
Okay.
husband.
I see your point, and I understand what Bill is saying. Also, I disagree with this with the interpretation of this. In other words, I disagree that especially First Peter, that the only way, because here's how she obeyed her husband. So you can't stop. See, this is my problem with the type of exegesis that fundamentalists are so love so much. They stop reading right there. How did she obey her husband?
Calling him Lord.
Calling him Lord. So then, if you say that all submission can only be submission if they obey, then it has to be as she obeyed, because it's all part of the same sentence. So submission is obedience, is calling your husband Lord. Then no woman in any fundamentalist church I've ever been to is obedient or submissive. You just can't stop reading and say where it's most convenient.
I'm working on that with Hadi.
I hope you're the first one. And look, if I can get one, it's like I don't need the whole world to exhibit the ideal. If just one could get to the promised land.
So
No.
So
So
obeying.
obedience
So
is.
obedience.
Let me go back to Stephen. To Bill real quick.
Okay.
Answer. I don't want him to think I just blew him off. What Bill is saying is that obedience is the action of all submission. I don't agree. And I don't think Titus 3:1 proves that obedience is the action of all submission. Because I can point out cases where I think you have submission without obedience and it's perfectly legitimate submission and obedience. And that situation would be untoward. If you came to me and said, all elders should obey each other in any meaningful way other than semantical orthodoxy, then I would tell you that you have an eldership that's wrong.
I would reword it to say obedience is submission. Obedience is what was it? Obedience is the
He said
act.
the act of submission. The action, sorry.
Okay,
I want to be
the
precise.
action
The action
of
of
submission.
The action of submission in a what do
In a
we call-
hierarchy?
in a hierarchy position. Yes, that's how.
Well,
I
but
would
everything's a hierarchy. I mean, you can prove this biologically. You can prove this in every way. Everything is. When you go to a forest, there's a hierarchy in the trees.
But you said so.
Well, there is.
So what is the word that you were distinct? Because obviously there's a
there's
distinction
all
between
different kinds of hierarchies.
there's a distinction between a father and a son and
And elders. Oh, yes, there's a difference.
There's a difference. What would you call that difference? What are you calling this hierarchy over here?
I'm just calling it out. I don't have a technical term for
Exactly,
this.
but that's what I'm
calling
saying.
it.
I'm calling that the
I
hierarchy.
said that obedience is an action of submission where it's required.
Where it's required.
But
Perfect.
not all. But submission does not inherently require obedience.
Okay, I would agree with that.
Well, then we're in agreement.
We're in agreement.
Now,
So
the
now
question
the question is in a wife
is marriage.
husband
But that's what I
and
said. That's the
requirement.
issue. That's the question begging of it. Is marriage a father-son relationship or is it co-elder relationship?
Okay,
I think it's a co-elder relationship.
I think it's
In the middle. Nice try.
It's a special relationship, a
unique one. So I look at it and I find that the elder relationship is far more analogous to marriage than the father-son relationship is. And that is, there is submission in eldership. Mm-hmm. It's not like we're all equal. No. That isn't what eldership relationship, that is a very simplistic view. There are elders who are, like Colt said, the one who made the gun, more equal than others. Meaning the younger submit to the elder. That's what he says. Now that does not mean they have greater authority, and that is hard for some people. Mm-hmm. They only can understand this top-down authoritarian type hierarchy. because they don't think about it any other way. But we live these very profound, complicated hierarchies all day, every day. You have it with your on a basketball team. On a basketball team, 5 guys on the court. They're all equal. They're all equal. Especially, you say we have a captain of the team, even though that's, we all know that's just like he's the coin flipper. But let's say he's not out there, just to simplify. You just got 5 guys on the court. They're not even an organized team. You're just out on the court and you pick up basketball. They're all equal, but they're never equal. There is going to be somebody there who is going to be a leader. Same way with women. You get 10 women in an office working together. They're all the same exact job description. So nobody has authority over the other. One of them will not be equal. They will actually align their menstrual cycles to that woman over a period of it's like 10 or 12 months it takes. But whoever is the dominant person in that hierarchy, even though it's not an office hierarchy or an official one or a formal one, it is one. And they will align to that woman in every way. It's amazing. They've done these studies. It's incredible how complicated this is, how complex it is, So you have these hierarchical structures. They're everywhere. They're not just and they're all incredibly complex. And we deal with them, we navigate them all day, every day. And yet when it comes to this, we're like, no, marriage is this. Oh, did we lose power? What happened? Are we still recording?
You're still recording.
Okay.
I wonder if it went to another file. Yeah, sorry guys, that had a big loud beep in our.
So, no, this is I'm clearing things up for how we're understanding it and where the differences is. That's perfect. Is the marriage? We do agree that obedience is required. Obedience in submission is necessary when it's required.
Right.
In that.
Yeah, there are relationships that require obedience. Is how I
to
would
be
phrase
submission. Perfect.
it. Right, because if it requires obedience, you're not really submissive if you're not obeying.
Perfect. And so the point is, what we're trying to figure out. I guess this is where our disagreement. We've come to where we've disagreed.
Yeah,
Is if the woman, the wife husband relationship is one of these.
that's right.
So my reasoning for thinking it is not for thinking it is obviously the First Peter thing, which can you've given your explanation for that, but all other places, because this isn't the only one where Ephesians 5. It's almost in so many different books of the New Testament, right? Where he's saying he's giving roles, he's giving relationships and how they're to be. Mm-hmm. And he uses the same word. They need to be subject unto
Submissive. It's hypotasso every time.
Right.
It's submit every time when it talks about husband and wife.
And
There's only one
says
difference.
Subject too. I mean, is there a problem with the word subject or?
No, it's not. I'm just clarifying that what he's talking about is submissiveness.
It's submission. Yes,
that's right.
It says submission.
That's right,
It
and
says
we
submit.
agree on that. So,
but it says submit for both servants.
It only says
and masters.
It only says submit one time to servants.
In Titus.
Yes, it's the only time.
But it uses it there.
But that does not prove that then obedience is everywhere submission is. Just because people who also obey should also submit as Christians, this is what he's saying there. What I think Paul is saying in Titus is you don't just do what you're told, but submit to your masters also. In other words, align your will to subjugate your will to their will. You don't have to do that to obey technically. A servant can obey his master and not submit to him. That's not submission in and of itself. You understand that, right?
So
you understand that obedience is not submission. When a son clenches his teeth and flexes his jaw and does what he's told, he's not submitting. So therefore, obedience is not submission. It is not synonymous, as Bill would say. No.
It's not.
So submission is different. Now,
Yes.
in a relationship
that
where
requires
obedience is required, submission will lead to obedience.
Yes.
Obedience does not backtrack to submission ever.
Yes. Yes.
You can't start with obedience and work your way to submission.
Yes.
You have to start with submission and work your way to obedience in that scenario. But if obedience isn't required, like now with me and my father, you with your father, if you as a grown man go from submission to your father, which I would hope you are, to obedience to your father, I would tell you that you're doing wrong is going to ruin your marriage. Because that's not an obedience relationship. And I'm saying that the marriage is not obedience. But let's say that it did. Let's say this for the sake of argument. Let's say for the sake of argument that marriage is an obedience relationship. You lay out how a woman is supposed to be obedient to her husband in specifics. Give me some specific, practical way in which a woman is obedient, not submissive, obedient to her husband.
Obedient, not submissive.
She can be submissive. I'm not saying she is submissive. We all agree. You and I we started at the point of what is marriage and we've gotten to end of submission. We're in a complete agreement, I think. So now you're saying obedience. Let's say that you're saying obedience. Okay. You tell me practically what does that look like?
So to you that would mean her will is still...
No, I want to know what it means to you.
No, I know.
Okay.
I'm asking what you're wanting. Her will is still... Her will hasn't changed. Her will is still, I want this. My will is this. But she is, in my opinion, required to do what I've decided. Yes, that's.
I don't know. I'm asking you.
I mean, is that what you're looking for?
Well, I want
Is that
specifics.
your question?
Right. I want specifics. I mean,
yes, I'll give you a
that's
specific.
okay.
I'm wondering if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, you tell me beyond submission, because every time somebody gives me a specific, they're telling me basically what submission is.
Okay.
Well, we talk about it, we discuss it, and then, she follows me. That's submission. That's not obedience.
Okay.
So I want a specific way in which obedience is real in marriage.
Okay, let me
sure.
Let's say your wife. She says, I want to go to Walmart at 12 at night because that's whenever I can, go do grocery shopping without everybody there. All the kids are, there's nothing to worry about. So that's my ideal time to grocery shop, 11:30 at night.
Okay.
And that's her desire. I say, no, I don't think going out past 10 is good. I think it's dangerous. I think there's some dangers there. I think, for whatever reason, I think no. Now, she really, there's a different will. She wants this, I want this. But I decide, because I think I'm going to be accountable if something happens to you because I'm letting you do this. Mm-hmm. So I decide no going out to Walmart past 10. Now, would she be required to obey?
Well, I'm asking you that.
I think she would.
So she's required to do that.
If she does not do that, she would be disobeying.
Now,
I think God,
okay, that's a good example. So let me ask you a couple questions, and I'm not going to go to I could pick it apart with cheap shots, and that would be unfair because you're making a real good point, and I don't want to do that. So let me word this carefully because I want it to be something that's not cheap. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I would put it like this. So let's say in that same scenario, that's obedience. Okay, fine, that is. Now let's say you are going to be in a job in which you are driving around town with a single coworker. Does she have the same right to say, no, I don't want you doing that? And you don't do it, even though you think you should, even though you think it's best, but you don't do it because she said no? Or do you have the right to say, well, I understand what you're saying, and I've thought about it, but I don't have to obey you, and I think this is the best decision, and I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to do what I think is right. Do you think that works that way? Or does she have the right to say
I don't think it would be wise.
No, that's not
Yes,
the question.
perfect.
Obviously, it's not wise.
I don't think it would be wise.
Obviously
but yes,
not.
I do think you would make that decision.
Okay,
and
well,
you would not be...
Then there's the crux of our disagreement.
Mm-hmm.
It's because I believe a woman had every right to tell you, no, you do not get to do that, and you should not do it, because it's not an obedience thing. I'm not obeying my wife when she tells me no. We're working together. That's what submission looks like. Submission looks like exactly what you said if the wife also has the right in those type of scenarios Well, you're looking at it and saying, hey, I'm the protector. By biological creation, I'm the protector. And what you're thinking of doing is putting you in danger, which jeopardizes my responsibility as the protector. This is how I'm looking at it. That's not how you present it. It's how I would present that scenario. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I'm telling you don't do that. And you're submitting to me by agreeing not to do it, understanding my role. Mm-hmm. But the woman is, in my scenario, is also equally liable for your sexual purity. That's why God made the woman. Companionship, helpmeet, and a lot of that has to do with sex. And she's saying no. And I think she has every right to say no. And I would tell you, if you came to me and said, but I'm the husband and I don't have to obey her, I say, this is not an obedience relationship. This is a submission relationship, not an obedience relationship. And if she says, no, you don't get to buy a boat, you don't get to buy a boat. Now, I understand. I'm not telling you have to agree with me. Basically, we're at the end of the deal, and I'm just explaining my view. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, though.
Right. No, I mean, so I think we would come at it the same way. I think we would give the same advice as far as I think the wife should have the input and she should. I just don't think she makes that decision.
Well, then we're not coming at it the same way because I think she does.
Right. So you think she makes that decision?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think that a wife has every bit as much right to tell her husband no as the husband does to tell the wife no. Absolutely. Understanding. Now, yes, absolutely. And she does.
I agree. We both have the right to tell each other no.
Well, I mean effectively.
Okay.
I mean that the
with obedience.
It's not the right. It's not the right if you say I don't have to listen. It's all built in to the point. I mean, that's all baked into the cake. You can't say someone has the right to say something if you don't have the right, if you don't have to listen. That's not a right. I don't mean she has free speech. I mean that when my wife tells me, I do not want you to go visit that woman or hang around with that lady or talk to her. I can't say, I have no right to say, I'm the husband, I make the decisions, and I'm going to do what I think is best. No. No right at all in that. And in many other things. I'm going to just buy a new computer. No, I'm the husband. I buy my computers. You want to buy shoes? Ask me permission, and I'll see if I want to. Or, we say, well, she doesn't ask. That's because they give them an allowance. It's like, here's your allowance. You can spend it however you want because I have granted it.
Well, see, I don't know. I don't know how. I don't apply it that way. I don't live that way.
That's my point. That's my point. Nobody lives that way. But that's what obedience is.
No, but what do you mean? I guess I'm not understanding.
Oh, but there's the way you just, to me, you summed up your position very favorably and very accurately. And that is, a man can tell a woman, you're not going to go to Walmart at 10:30 or 11:30 at night or whatever time it is that he sets. And she should obey, even if she disagrees. Mm-hmm. A woman can tell her husband, I don't want you driving around the city showing, say you're a realtor, showing houses with this woman from your office. And you can listen and maybe take her opinion into consideration, but at the end of the day, you have every right to say, you can't go to Walmart, but I can drive around with a woman. To me, that is a fair and favorable position or definition or explanation of that position. And I disagree with that. Mm-hmm. I think that the husband can tell the woman no, and she should submit, understanding the role that he's playing there. Now, that role isn't always the case. In the case that you gave, the example I thought was a beautiful example because I do think that is a role in which the husband has that supremacy, okay. Right? It's about protection. It's about all these things. And a woman should understand that and submit to that role. Mm-hmm. But there are roles in which a woman has that in marriage also. And a husband should submit to that role. Men aren't in charge of everything in the marriage. There's things that they just have to accept. And a woman has a right. For instance, the purity of the bedroom, I think, is largely in the women's end. This is not just a doctrinal perspective. This is a biological and a psychological one. Any psychologist will tell you that women control sexual action and interaction. Bible does basically as well. Mm-hmm. That is the woman's purview. She has every right to tell you no, even if it has adverse effects on your job. And I don't think you have a right to weigh it. I think you have to comply. And that's the partnership of the marriage. That is where submission comes in.
But then that's not obedience?
No. Because I don't see how you have mutual obedience.
See, what you just defined
The reason why you're saying,
seems to me like all you're saying is no, but the husband also has to be obedient.
well, that's because we're saying obedience means
Right.
submission. That's because that's what you're seeing it as. If obedience is what obedience really is in any other place, then that's not obedience. That is what the Bible talks about, which is so much better. This isn't about saying, hey, we're all free. Women, do whatever you want. Absolutely not. But this is about saying that we have something so much better than that in marriage. That is a simple relationship that a father has with his son when he's 5 or 6 or 10. That is a relationship of a drill sergeant with his private. This is not the relationship that really exhibits Christ and the church, which isn't also an obedience relationship. It's a submission relationship. Anyways, look, we don't have to, the idea with this podcast was never to say, I'm going to persuade you.
Yeah.
I think we've had a great conversation.
Yeah, that
Fascinating.
I think it's very deep. There's a
Yes.
lot to this.
No, and you're going to have to think about it.
A lot to think about.
And I understand where you're coming from. I understand the semantical orthodox crowd that want to make sure they're saying the right words because they're in the Bible and you have to say the words have to be there. My problem with all the semantical arguments, what I think are semantical arguments, is that it doesn't matter what the words mean. And so they basically become to mean essentially what I think that marriage is. Like I said, what I depicted as an obedience relationship was based on what you said. You then said, well, we don't live that way. Exactly. Nobody lives that way. So then either we're living
What I
wrong.
meant was,
What you mean is if your wife says, I don't want you with that woman, you wouldn't be with her. I know what you would do.
right, okay.
I would too. Even if I thought the way you or whoever, or Bill or whoever, thinks, even though I thought the woman obeys the man, and my wife says, I do not want you driving around with her, I wouldn't drive around with that woman. Mm-hmm. That's how we live. It's not how we believe.
One thing that you just mentioned, and that's one of the things I don't like, kind of maybe with this, the way you're arguing it,
Okay.
is the obedience. And I understand you're thinking submission means so much more, and we lose it if we just want to call it obedience, kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, that would be anything.
Right.
We lose obedience if
Right.
we try to call it
And
submission.
that's so again, whenever you talk about obedience as like, oh well, that's a relationship, with a father with a 5-year-old. Again, I think obedience means a lot more. It's much stronger. It's very deep. It's not just
Okay, that's
something-
fair, but surely you acknowledge that it's not nearly as deep as submission. I mean, just the words themselves,
Right.
there's a huge difference between submitting your will to somebody else's will and doing what you hear, which is what the word means, to do what you hear. Surely you understand that. And so I'm not saying that, when I depicted those
No, I
two
agree.
together and said the 5-year-old, I'm really not trying to diminish obedience. Like I said earlier, I think obedience is a grand idea, wonderful idea, and the destruction of it has wreaked havoc on our society. Because there should be obedience in many places. Most of the hierarchies, human relationship hierarchies, somewhere obedience is in them. Not all of them, but most of them. That's just how we set them up, right? Because we understand it so easy, because it's such a simple, relatively simple concept. And so we establish as human beings, all our hierarchies, or as much as we can, on obedience hierarchies. Because a submission hierarchy is almost impossible to put into practice. It's why most churches don't have plurality of elders. It's a nightmare to implement. A nightmare. Compared to just saying, okay, here's the lead elder. He makes the final decision, and here are these, and they have these responsibilities, these areas, and so on. That's such a simpler thing to implement. And this plurality of eldership, and then an open meeting where everyone's submissive to the other. I mean, these things are nightmarish for our minds that are such simple dichotomous type things. We think in black or white, one way or the other, A or B, right? And so then to set up a submission type system, well, we're hardly ever going to see it. It's going to be very rare. But it's because it's so complex. But that's what makes it so beautiful. But it only works where there is a true will to serve others. See, obedience doesn't require that. You can be obedient with no will to submit. It happens all the time. People don't pay their taxes because they're submissive to the government. People pay their taxes because they don't want to go to jail. But when Christians tithe or give, it's not because of fear. They're not doing that out of obedience. The majority of them are not. They're doing it out of agreement, out of submission, of putting their will as being subject to the will of others. The lost, the elders, whatever the cases they're giving to, they care about them and not themselves. And it's an incredibly different thing. Now, that doesn't mean that it's one or the other. I want to be clear on that.
That's the thing, yes.
It's not one or the other unless
I
you're
think
in a
that's the
relationship.
difficult part is
Right.
when, explaining this, you can make it seem like, oh, we don't have to obey.
I know. And that goes back to the dichotomous, the
Right.
monkey brain dichotomy, right? That we don't, it's like, oh, not obedience. Not what I'm saying. I am saying that in marriage. And I am saying that as elders. If you came to me and we were talking about eldership and you're saying who obeys who, I'd be telling you the exact same thing I'm saying about marriage. So it's not just about marriage. If we're talking about how a basketball team plays on the court, you say, well,
Right.
who obeys who? I would say that's not how it works. It's a different scenario. It's a whole different hierarchy out there. It doesn't work on obedience. Now, they obey the coach. That's one that works on obedience. Coach says, you do this. You don't, I'll bench you. Yeah, there's a hierarchy that works on obedience. The 5 guys on the court, they're not obeying each other. They're working together and they're submitting, and there's probably one alpha dog out there that they all submit to. But if you ask them, do you obey him? They'd say, no way. They're not obeying him.
Mm-hmm.
It's different.
Well, I think we're at a point.
Yeah, we're at a good stopping point.
Stephen, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
This was
I do
great
too.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to do
enjoyed
this
it.
more often. Get you back
yes,
again.
yes, that is something we need to.
These are the kind of conversations I've been wanting to have on this. It's just hard to find
Yeah.
people willing to do something
Yeah.
that seems controversial. This isn't. Just so everyone knows, this is not controversy. Okay, we're great friends, and we'll continue to be friends, and our marriages probably aren't going to change. I mean, I'm going to have a black eye tomorrow, obviously, but I'm used to that.
Yeah. When you invited me over, I was thinking, out of all the subjects we have to talk about,
Yeah, we'll
I
get
never
you back for another one.
I never expected this was going to be the
But
topic.
this was interesting, and like I said, it went into what I think this is more about. Practically, I don't think this is about any marriage you and I know. I think my marriage is the same, and it will be the same regardless of how I deal with these words and even the concepts in them. I think maybe not. Maybe I'll agree with you, and then I'll be like, no more shoes. I love
You
that.
have no idea how good it is.
But anyways, to me, the whole idea, and this was what I started with, and I want to, I guess I'll let you end, but I'll end my part with this and say that what I said at the beginning, I still think holds. And what my main issue is on all of this, even more than marriage, even though it's big, but more than that, is this idea of semantical orthodoxy, that if you say the right words, you can make them mean anything you want. And I resist that with every fiber of my being. I do not like it. I think that it is the bane of fundamentalism. And I think I can demonstrate many, I won't get into them, but many examples in which fundamentalists believe and act exactly like me. And yet I'm a heretic because I won't use their words.
Yeah. My difficulty with this one specifically, I guess, would be all the examples of Jesus, where I think he is being submissive and showing that submissiveness.
Right.
And yet it translates in a few places where it's called obedience.
Okay.
And that's where
Yeah, no, I see that.
I think
well,
that's
that's
why
definitely something
a
worth
lot
looking
of...
at.
Well, that's very good.
Yeah.
So just so everybody knows, I'm not being prejudiced or biased on who I was reading the questions for. I appreciate y'all being here.
We're gonna.
I really do. I'm glad y'all had all these questions, and hopefully we can actually get to answering these maybe one day.
Yeah, I wouldn't count on
this
it.
would take about all day to go through every one of these.
Look,
questions.
I
There's so
appreciate
many. Yeah.
I appreciate everyone who participated in this. If Steven would have just shut, I told him he would have just shut up.
I know, I
and,
should've.
and let Nolan talk.
I'm sorry.
Hey, so anything else about this?
No.
Okay, so next Saturday at 9, we always try to film live, and if we don't film live, just so you know, we don't edit it. Whatever it is, it is. We don't edit anything out. We just put it up, and if we can do it live, we do it live. Next Saturday, if he can do it, we're going to have Scott Newman on, which I'm really looking forward to. I think it'll be a great conversation. We're going to talk some about what he's up to and some of his interests. He's into video and audio, so I mean, we're going to talk about that a lot because I'm real curious. I mean, he's going to look at our setup here
get a little...
and be a little like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm on this lame-o show. But maybe you'll give us some pointers and won't charge us for them. So that's it. But we're also, I told him I want to talk to him about faith and God. I'm not looking to debate like this. I want a conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really curious about his path, how he went from point A where we knew him to where he is now, and what that looks like. And I have questions for him. So if you're looking in to see atheist destroys Christian, well, you might find that. But if you're looking to see Christian destroys atheist, you're not going to see that. And if that's going to offend you, don't watch, because I'm no interest in arguing or debating or getting him in tears and repenting. I want to talk to him, have a great conversation with him, like we did today. I thought we had a great conversation. We want to have you back again another time. Send me another email and criticize me, and we'll get another
I'll
invite
find something
on.
else.
Yeah,
It doesn't take much.
We actually got a lot.
You call him fat, he'll come on. We'll bring out the scale.
Yeah, we're like, all right, let's weigh in.
See.
Come on, hunky. And if you have any ideas for guests, it can't be yourself. You can't nominate yourself. But if you have an idea of a guest you'd like to see on the program, we have a bunch of them lined up already. We're going to try to be bringing in people who disagree with me on things, because that just makes great conversation. It's not, I have no interest in winning any debates, but it just makes for good conversation if you have somebody who disagrees on something, even, because you can go places.
Even if they
from
bring up the right questions.
Right, it's just good. And so that's what we're trying to do. We've wanted to do that, and it's just been hard to figure this all out. But I think we got a bunch of guests lined up, and we'll be announcing them as we go. Saturdays at 9 is when we go live. If they can't do it live, we'll record it earlier, and we'll broadcast it at 9 a.m. So Saturdays at 9 is when you'll find them. Later on in the day, you can get these on podcast form, and you can go to Google Play, Spotify, or iTunes, search for Freeborn Church or Freeborn Podcast, and you can find these in audio if you want to just be able to listen to them and not watch the video. And I'm Mike Jackson. This is Stephen Kincaid. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
I'll give you a little Budweiser virus handshake there. Go wipe that off. And we're from Freeborn Church. We were meeting at the YMCA. Right now we live cast our sermons and meetings at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings on YouTube, and you can find us on our channel. Thanks for being with us, and we hope God will bless each of you. Have a great day.